right, we are live with my woman's drink
With your woman's drink.
and men's woman's shirt.
Sorry, you just say out
Men's
loud
women's.
what your drink is, just for the record.
This is a mango white claw. But at least I'm not wearing a pink shirt. So.
That's true, yeah. And you can see my nipples through it. You can see your nipples too. Now that I'm looking, those are impressive though. Oh, wow. I'm not sure if you're having a stroke, but call an ambulance. How does this work?
Well, you could give me mouth-to-mouth resuscitation.
I mean, I am wearing a pink shirt. You know, be the most pink
fly.
you got this week.
Yo, this week, come on.
Yeah.
Add, like,
Okay.
this
Yo.
year.
2020. Holla.
2020 was a strange year. Would you like to talk about the strangeness that's going on right now? in
Oh yeah.
2020?
So okay. What? Want to start with the news today?
Yes, please.
Okay, so I think biggest article that was in the news today, I think, was the Attorney General of New York filing the lawsuit to abolish the N.R.A. I think that's the biggest thing that came out of the last 24 hours.
Yeah, so N.R.A., what's that again?
National
The Nipple Ring Association?
Yeah, Nipple Ring Association, the National Nipple Ring Association, National Rifle Association. So effectively, what they are is they call themselves like a rights group that lobbies for and advocates for Second Amendment rights. So whether or not you agree with it, you know, that's a whole other topic that we're not going to get into quite yet. But that's what they say they do, right? So they
Yes.
support candidates who advocate for the Second Amendment. They lobby for it themselves. They try to get laws and regulations passed that support it, things like that.
Okay. And what happened recently today?
So the Attorney General of New York, they have, what is it, like a charter? They're founded in New York, something like that. Something that ties them to New York from a regulation standpoint, right? Where the Attorney General of New York has authority over their organization as a nonprofit or like a charitable organization, because they have a lot of the same rules, that they have rights to put sanctions on them up to the highest sanction of abolishing them. So there was a lawsuit put against them for committing fraudulent acts, for misusing their not-for-profit funds, and the Attorney General is seeking to abolish them. Oh, okay. Yep. We have
She agrees.
guest star today. So the Attorney General is seeking to abolish them, which is the highest sanction that they can impose. And on top of that, I don't know if they're seeking charges against or just sanctions against, but it's, I believe, 4 of their top executives or previous executives for misusing those funds.
Yes. So,
That is quite the contribution, Matt. Yes.
I'm taking it all in. Mostly the White Claw, but your speech too. So, yes. It's quite the predicament, because what they're doing, essentially, is going after an entire organization for the fault and wrongdoing of a couple members of the association, which is mostly the higher-ups.
Yeah.
The ones who are in charge of the money, and or giving it off to people who they want to bribe that may be like lower in the
Yeah,
the
so that's I
hierarchy.
kind of share the same opinion, right? I think, like they said, it's those 4 people that they've kind of pinned it down to who seem to be the primary perpetrators, who are like the higher ups, you know, the CEOs, CFOs, whatever. Prior executives is basically what it boils down to, that are misusing these funds for personal reasons, for family trips, you know, for gifts for their friends, you know, membership to a whatever yacht club. I don't know. Stuff like that. They actually did do golf clubs. I don't know if yacht clubs was actually on the list, but they were like country club, golf club members too, using these funds, which again is wrong, but I don't think abolishing the organization is the right answer for the misdeeds of a handful of people.
Well, it's the same argument that they're trying to propose, the fact that guns kill people. There has nothing to do with the actual person firing the gun.
Yeah, okay. So
So,
so do we want to like continue on the N.R.A. thing first, or do we want to go to the guns kill people?
well, I feel like it's the same thing. It's part of
It's-
the NRA.
all right, so
Because
it's not
it is
far
a
off.
gun association.
Because here's the thing. All right, so right now, obviously, it's 2020. a lot of riots going on, protests, especially the whole Black Lives Matter movement. And I'm not saying it's the people who are advocating for the Black Lives Matter movement who do it. I think it's a few bad actors who are kind of ruining the entire protest and the movement behind it for their own personal purposes and their own rioting, right? I think it's a few bad actors ruining it for the many.
In the same situation here.
And yeah, I think it's the same situation, because here's the thing. It's a Second Amendment right in the same way it's a First Amendment right. You have a right to free speech. You have a right to own and bear arms. In the same way you have a Fifth Amendment right, and a Fourth and a Third, all the way through, however, 37.
Z amendment.
I actually don't know the total count. They have like 20-something amendments at this point. But like, you get what I'm saying, right? Like, it's a right at the end of the day. And I think this is the only and primary group that advocates for Second Amendment rights. Like, whether or not you agree with it, it is still a constitutional right. This is the primary group that advocates for it. Going after the organization as a whole, I don't think is the right thing to do, because you're, I think, unfairly targeting that one amendment that will guaranteed.
Yeah, but you're also missing the whole point that these people don't even like the amendment to begin with. So this is kind of a way for them to
That's also true,
the
yeah.
amendment. So if they say, "Oh, we get rid of the organization, let's just get rid of the entire amendment, make a new amendment to amend that one."
Yeah, I don't think you're wrong. And this is what I've heard, and I obviously have no personal knowledge of this Attorney General. I have no personal way of verifying this, and I haven't really dug into her history and her decisions on things to make this assessment, but I've heard she's very notoriously left-wing, which makes sense given, New York's stance as a whole. And I've heard that's kind of why potentially she's doing this, is to target them as what is historically a right-wing organization. So what are your thoughts on that? Let's start with that. Unbottle that one real quick. Shake that cola and pop the top.
Are you saying this is a liberal versus conservative war going on?
I think to an extent.
A lot of politics is usually that way. Like,
which I think is kind of an unfortunate thing, right? So here's kind of my stance on it right now. I think, unfortunately, politics are coming into it with how much of a polarized political atmosphere we have right now. Whereas I don't think if this was any other sort of rights group, they would target the organization as a whole. I think they would just target the individuals involved, which I think is still the right thing to do. Don't get me wrong, right?
Yeah.
They're misusing these funds that should be charitable or not-for-profit funds. I think it's still the right thing to go after them. I don't think abolishing a group that is the biggest advocate for a constitutional amendment, and quite frankly, one of the only ones in the country that is on such a national scale, I don't think going after them as a whole is the right thing to do.
yeah, I agree with that. There's definitely a lot of gray area in this, right? Where what is right, what is wrong in this situation, and what would be the best stance for the country as a whole. Right? Would eliminating this entire association benefit the country as a whole?
I don't think it would.
Yeah, it probably wouldn't.
And
But
okay, so like here's the other thing,
we could say
right?
that removing them would benefit as a whole, right? Having more oversight over the organization, having better
Right,
accountability
putting the
for
appropriate
funds.
controls in place to make sure they're not doing these, quite frankly, illegal acts perpetrated by a small number of individuals.
Yeah, because this could be any other organization. Let's say you had a regular business, like let's say you owned a tech superstore and you were smuggling money through. Of course, you would seek the same penalty as this, but I believe that
Yeah, but you wouldn't abolish the company.
yeah, you wouldn't abolish the company. So I feel at the same time, and this is not even really a company; it's a charitable organization.
It's
the
a
whole-
not-for-profit
not-for-profit.
organization
So-
that advocates for a constitutional right.
Yeah, so there is a good underlying goal of the organization that was
I agree with
not
that. Yeah,
was not accurately executed
because like
in recent years.
I agree with that, and like building on that, right? Let's say this was any other constitutional amendment that they went after. They're like, okay, we have one and only one organization that's like, you can have free speech, and we're going to defend that like all hell.
I mean, they've been doing that right now.
Yeah, and they're like, yeah.
I mean, we can go into that
To an
topic,
extent, yeah.
but-
So we won't go into it too much, but like, let's say there was one and only one primary organization that defended it, and they were like, haha, we're going to get rid of that, everyone would be like, what the hell are you doing? Same thing with like, okay, you can no longer use the Fifth Amendment, so you don't have to self-incriminate. And if a judge asks you, hey, did you do this crime? And you know you did it and you're on trial, you have to answer, right? Let's say there's one organization that's advocating to keep that and everyone else is like, let's get rid of it. You'd be like, dude, like, why are you trying to get rid of this for us, right? So I think only because firearms in general are a controversial topic,
Yes.
and historically the left has been against them or has been in place of putting much more stringent controls upon them, especially quite frankly, the extreme left views who are also like, destroy all civilization and put in only solar power and Bernie Sanders socialism. Like, I don't know.
I mean, there's definitely huge polarizations that you can go in either direction.
Yeah.
Are guns dangerous? Yes.
They're
They're
if
dangerous
misused, absolutely.
If misused, yes, this is a fact. But in the right context, can they be used properly? And the answer is yes, they can be used properly as well. So
building on that, all right. So if you look at the number of gun crimes versus the number of times they're lawfully used for home defense and self-defense, the number of home defense uses and self-defense uses greatly outweigh the number of illegal uses or assault uses. Like, substantially. I can't remember the statistics offhand, but it's something like 5 to 7 times. And we can look it up and we'll probably display it on the screen or something. I don't know. We can add it in. But like, the point being, like, the number of lawful actual uses as intended substantially more, like multiple times more than the illegal uses, which I think is 100% in support of the original intent of it and supports why we should continue to have this.
yes. I mean, we can cut at this point and talk about and add in the story that you did on the last one.
So even before that, like, I don't even think we need to get to that. So beyond just the statistics, right? If you look at, obviously, a lot of the protests going on right now, I think not only are the attacks on getting rid of the Second Amendment and like putting more restrictions on it, not only I think are they unfounded, I also think they're misaligned with the current public opinion and how most Americans feel. And the reason I say that is looking at some recent statistics for firearm sales, for, gun ownership. 2020, the first half of 2020 compared to the first half of 2019, the statistics I saw, 145% increase in firearm sales. 10.3 million firearms sold in the first half of 2020. 10.3 million, of which 2.5 million of which were first-time firearm owners. 25% of those first time ever buying a firearm.
Yeah.
That's a huge percent. On top of that, if you look at statistics for people who maybe don't currently have one, but say in the future I could view myself as a potential firearm owner at some point in the future, it's up to 50% of the population.
Yeah, I mean, it also falls in line with what's been going on, right? Whenever there's fear and chaos, people go out and they want to get stuff to protect themselves.
Yeah.
Which is a lot of the reasons why people have guns, for protection.
Which is quite literally what the Second Amendment says.
Yes. And, okay, well, we eliminate everyone who wants to protect themselves for the few that are aggressive, right? So, I kind of look at it a little bit like any martial arts, right? Anyone who's taken martial arts knows that the reason why you learn martial arts is for defense. And most people who know martial arts are actually less likely to get into fights. Because...
Caveat being, with some degree of proper training, right?
Yes. And let's say they may still get into fights, but they're not going to start fights. Because why? They know that they can defend themselves. Whereas people who don't know that, or they think, like, because every dude thinks there's two things. One, he thinks that he can fuck hard. And two, he thinks that he can kick any other dude's ass. Which both of these, statistically speaking,
not
are
likely.
false.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I'm batting 0% at both. right now. I'm just throwing that out there as a statistic.
So,
Except once I got lucky. I kicked someone's ass. No, I didn't.
so, yes, exactly. So, should guys learn how to fuck better? Yes. Should they know how to defend themselves in a situation? Yes. Do all people do that? No. So, going back to the guns, is it good to know how to properly use a gun and properly defend yourself, even if you don't own one? Yes. At least you know what it is. You know the inherent dangers and
you have some basic education on the functions
Yes.
of it and the actual capabilities of it. That way it's not a bunch of misinformation.
a lot of the stuff that's coming out on the news is just like, oh, these guns are so blah 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 blah. So most of the people who read these statistics and knowledge are like, oh, I've never used a gun before, but the media and the people of authority are telling me guns are super dangerous. That's a lot of the things where, like, let's say people don't want to visit countries, right? You could say, oh, I don't want to visit the Middle East because it's so dangerous because the media says that there's all this stuff going on. Where a majority of the people in these countries, other than like the government, they're actually nice people just trying to make a living, doing their daily thing. They're very, like, friendly to their neighbors. Like, that's just the general consensus.
So you've reminded me of a number of points that we can touch on here. So, first being, right, basic education of how to use it, even if you don't own it, gives you a much better understanding of, the dangers involved and the process involved and the vetting involved before you can even get one, right?
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of misconceptions, especially about people who've never purchased one. Like, it's not like you just show up and you just, like, slap cash on the counter and they give you one and you run out the door, right? Like, that's not how it goes.
right into the next store and you rob them. Like,
Yeah, and you rob the 7-Eleven on the way back, and there's no way to trace you because you paid cash. Like, that's not really how it happens. Like we're in New Hampshire. New Hampshire, I would say, is not like the least stringent, but I would say one of the relatively less stringent states. You're not required to register it, but there's still, there's background checks everywhere is where it really comes down to, right? You go into the store, you say, I want to buy that, and they say, okay, you write down your home address, your license information, your name, obviously, and I think you have to put your social too. And what they do is they take all of that and they give it to the FBI, like right off the bat. And this is like one of the fastest buying processes, right? First thing they do is they send it to the FBI. The FBI runs all your stats. They check the national databases. They make sure there's nothing against you that's reported at a national level by any other state that makes sure you shouldn't have a firearm, right? And that takes typically at least an hour to run.
Yeah.
If they have absolutely no one else to run ahead of you, you might get super lucky. You have like the most fast-paced agent of all time. You might get it done in like 30 to 45 minutes. But that's probably not going to happen. Figure at least an hour, right? Other states on top of the FBI check have a day to 3 day waiting period. On top of that, that firearm with the serial number is linked to you at the time of purchase. And even if it isn't registered to you, they still have that record of doing the background check against you for trying to purchase the firearm on that date. They can go back to the store records and find out which one it was with the serial number if they need to, right? So there's a number of ways to track it. It's not like you just waltz in, slap 100 on the counter, walk out with like a machine gun, and then like go dancing. And that's another thing, right? Anything that has a suppressor to like dull out some of the noise, which first of all, it doesn't make it like the James Bond quiet firearm that everyone thinks it is. You're right, yeah. So suppressor, it suppresses it. It's not called a silencer for a reason. It's not silent. It's still loud. It just makes it so it doesn't shatter your eardrums as you fire it. That needs a class 3 license. That's like a 3 or 4 month process at best to buy one, with like a $700 to $1,000 license to be able to purchase one. That's super stringent. Machine guns, same thing. And when I say like 3 months at best, 3 months at best, figure 9 months to a year to be able to purchase one if you can afford it, right? Super stringent background requirements. And like the gun show thing too, where they're like, oh, you just go to a gun show, it's a loophole. The thing is, most people who go to gun shows and have stands, they have their own store and they're just going to the gun show to make additional sales. The laws everywhere are that if you can normally run a background check and you normally have the facilities to do so, you have to also do it if you are at a gun show. So it's only if you're like a private guy and you have like, oh, I'm trying to sell these 2 custom-made firearms I made, you don't have to do it because you wouldn't have to do it otherwise anyhow in a private sale. But for any other vendor who's like offloading these things like chocolate bars, I guess, I don't know.
So you're saying if someone 3D prints a gun and they sell it, it's legal.
That's illegal.
So they cannot 3D print the
You
gun.
cannot manufacture firearms for the explicit purpose of selling or just distribution. That's a felony.
So then it's black market guns then.
That's technically black market. So here's the thing. Yeah, you can't just produce them and sell them. If you're going to get them and it's through someone who's high volume enough that they're selling them off regularly, they have to do the FBI background check. There are a number of these things in place. And like I said, even if it's that 1 to 3 hour background check for some place like New Hampshire where it's like relatively quick, that's still a federal background check of what every state reports, right?
Yeah.
So even
so this includes like your arrests, right? All this stuff, police reports, any misconduct,
anything that could prevent you from purchasing one that would be like, oh, he's got 6 convictions for violent assaults. Like, yeah, well, we're not going to give it to him.
He had sex in a parking lot.
And on
3
top
times.
of that, I believe the store owners as well that just once.
Just one
wasn't
time.
reported. No. But on top of that, like the store owners have the right to refuse you the sale, right? So if you come in and you're sketchy as hell and you're really pissed off, like it's not like you're just going to a vending machine and punching in numbers. Like there's still human interaction, right? Like they can see that you're a psychopath, I would imagine, that you're pissed off. Like,
yeah, hence the cooldown period for some states, but I don't know if New Hampshire has it. But
yeah, but like if I'm so dead set on murdering someone that I'm like, oh, I'm gonna go buy a firearm right now, I don't think 2 days is what's gonna stop me. You know, like.
Yeah, it's like there's a huge illegal market too, to talk about. So like, getting rid of a legal market will not get rid of the illegal market
Or the secondhand market.
Which I believe a lot of people are thinking, well, you get rid of legal guns will disappear. And no,
yeah,
that's
if you wait
not how
like
it
300
works.
years and you slowly hunt
So,
down
I
all
mean,
the other ones, right?
People are going to want guns, like people want drugs. And so you can say, all right, well, we're going to make all these drugs illegal. How big does the black market get? And we know for a fact the black market gets huge.
What do you mean? There isn't a single marijuana anywhere.
Dude, I'm not even just talking about that. Let's talk about all the other illegal drugs.
Yeah, for real though. Like that's kind of the point, right? If there's a will, there's a way.
Yes.
There's such a flooded market
and there's
right
a demand,
now
a huge demand for it.
Because of how much of a history that America has with firearms to begin with, right? There's so many in the market that even if they were outlawed today and they said, you know, oh, you probably turn those all in, like it's not going to happen. And there's going to be so many out there still that are like unaccounted for or just lost that you're never going to get rid of that full supply.
Turn in their firearms, dude, they rather die before they turn in
exactly.
their firearms. Like you couldn't
get
that done.
Constitutional amendment, they have that right.
Yes. But then you can have a lot of people who are probably listening to this podcast from, like, let's say, Asia or Europe, and will be like, well, in my state of the woods of the neck of the year place, we don't have any guns, and we have no problems.
But they also never historically had them either, so there's none, like, on the market to obtain secondhand, right? So that's the other part is even if we got rid of them, there's so many already out there that it's not going to make a bit of difference. But, like, also, a lot of the places elsewhere, they're like, oh, we have less shootings. They also have laws in place that completely nullify the use of firearms. So, like, for example, I heard of a couple countries, it could have been England, where if you do get the permits and stuff to get the firearm, they can do in-home inspections to make sure it's locked up appropriately. And, you know, it's a pain in the ass to take it anywhere or to get ammunition for it and all that stuff. But, like, if my house is getting robbed, right? Like, what's this house total? 30, 40 feet?
Yeah.
Yeah, if someone's coming into my house and they have a firearm and I've got 30 feet before they get to me, they can get there in 10 seconds easy, right? I don't want to worry about, undoing a safe and then undoing a trigger lock and then undoing a separate thing for the ammunition and then loading it up. They're going to kill me 7 minutes before my firearm's ready.
And let's talk about that fact. If someone is doing something illegal, like robbing someone else's house, guaranteed that firearm is probably not legal as well. So if you're going to say, all right, well, let's have this law-abiding citizen who, let's say, owns their own place, does their own thing, does not bother anyone, and gets, just for bad luck of the draw, gets robbed, then you're going to say, oh, well, they can't protect
by
themselves.
Someone who already is violating the law and
Yes.
clearly intends to continue violating it, right?
Yes. And so then we're going to say they can't defend themselves, which a lot of times what happens, and I know you have the story for this, they see that you have a gun and or are reaching for a gun, and that deters them enough to, exactly, piss the fuck off. Which goes back to the whole thing of, well, people say, oh, why did we have this space race and nuclear arms race with Russia?
Deterrence, right.
Deterrence. And you could say, oh, well, that was a waste of money. Or you could say, well,
that's the only reason that we've secured our position as a superpower that, quite frankly, guarantees our day-to-day freedoms.
That's a very American response.
But is it wrong?
But I'll give it to you. They haven't destroyed the planet yet. So
we dropped 2. Everyone backed up. Nah, that's terrible to say. That was like the anniversary was yesterday.
We've dropped more than 2. That's for sure. We've had a lot on human.
We've dropped
humans.
2 in combat.
Yes, but we've tested
blown
hundreds. Up. Yeah, we've tested
hundreds.
A lot more. Yeah.
It's an absurd amount. Yeah.
So is it good for the environment? No.
Are you talking about firearms or nuclear warheads?
Nuclear warheads.
Oh, God awful.
No.
I'm amazed we haven't died yet.
Yes. So, are we advocating nuclear arm heads? No.
Nuclear arm heads?
Newly arm heads.
Newlyweds?
Newlyweds.
No newlyweds.
No newlyweds in this
You heard
planet.
it here first, folks.
It's 2020. You don't need to get married anymore.
That's true. Yep. So, not advocating for nuclear arms.
So, can I have a civil union with my gun? So, like, people can get married to the opposite sex. Why can't I,
Dude, go back to Georgia. That's all I'm saying.
Give it to my gun, every other night.
Yeah, you want to just pipe that barrel?
You've got a clean barrel, you dirty. You got a dirty barrel.
I'm really gonna swab that barrel. Yeah. Okay, that got weird.
That got weird real quick.
All right, back on topic. But even like you said, deterrence, and we can go into my story in a minute. But like I said earlier on, right, the number of lawful uses of firearms where they're used lawfully in a defense setting, or like a home defense or anti-theft, whatever, far, far, far outweighs the illegal uses.
Yeah, and I think it also goes too with the fact of what's the potential damage of a firearm. And that's what really scares people, right? Because the more powerful a weapon, the more like, okay, well, this shouldn't be legal, right? So why, like knives, anyone can own a knife. Can you kill someone with a knife?
Yes.
Yes. Do you have knives very readily available? Yes. But how many people are you going to kill with a knife? And the answer is
a lot.
You could a lot, but at the same time, there's a limit on how many you're physically at a limit. Whereas
not
a gun,
necessarily. So okay,
you could
so here's the other
probably
thing,
kill
right?
more in a shorter period of time.
And this goes back to what you were saying earlier of it's not necessarily guns that kill people, right? It's people who want to kill people and they use a gun to do it.
Yeah.
So there have been major stabbing sprees in a bunch of major other countries, right? Where they kill 10 to 15 people on a stabbing spree because they keep going and there's no loud bang to notify anyone else.
Yeah, and the thing is, someone has to be brave enough, or a couple people have to be brave enough to
take them down,
like hold their arms. Like that's the only way that you can stop someone like that.
And I think the key
with
difference,
a gun is actually, or like get the knife out of their hands. But
I think a key difference, right? A gun enables them to do it more rapidly,
But you also have
you're also notified a lot quicker. You
can
have to
hear it.
reload. You hear it.
And there's a reloading, so after that's done, you basically can get on the dude or woman or it.
Statistically, probably a guy.
Yes.
Let's be real.
Let's be real. So
Probably a white dude.
right? Unless you're in the Middle East. But
Wow. I'm not sure if that's racist or statistically based. Can we look that one up?
but yes, so a knife you can continually stab people as long as it doesn't get caught.
Yeah.
Assuming it doesn't get caught in something. But
Which is technically the same as a firearm. You can keep shooting people as long as you don't get caught.
yes. But how many people would carry around knives with them for defense? Couple people.
Some. Like, I use it more, like, for my job. I have to open boxes and stuff, like, a few times a day. And
Do you feel protected when you have that knife?
oh,
like,
hell
let's
no.
say-
Like, here's the thing, right? Because currently my ankle's broken, especially. And I still carry, like, a knife just because, you know, utility value of it. If someone attacked me while I'm on crutches and I'm like, like wobbling around with a knife in one hand, no, I'm still getting mugged. Straight up, they're just going to push me over gently, like dodge once and knock me over and be like, all right, now give me your wallet. And I'll be like, yeah, shit. Here you go.
Yeah. And I think that's where the difference lies, is the safety factor mentally in your mind.
Yeah, it's the
Because-
peace of mind.
The peace of mind, because you could be very skilled with a knife and you can be very skilled with a gun. And in certain situations, you could just be just as safe with a knife if someone else did not have an equal,
In the right circumstances.
in the right circumstances, an equal or a better weapon. Like if someone else had a gun and you had a knife, all right, you're shit out of luck.
Yeah, it's literally
But-
the expression, don't bring a knife to a gunfight, right?
Yes, but if there was no gun to begin with, would a knife be sufficient enough?
I would say no, because here's the thing, right? Like you're saying with martial arts earlier and all that, someone with adequate training, they can counter that, and once they're in effectively melee range, I think a lot of that degree of safety goes out the window, and even if you're well trained, they can take their training as well, and it's one person's training versus another, whereas a firearm, most people, let's say you're a career criminal, right? Chances are you have some sort of a record. As a result of that, you are less likely to be able to own a firearm. Now, I, as a homeowner, let's say I have a firearm, someone breaks in as a career criminal, they're coming at me. Chances are, once again, less likely that they'll be able to have one because they're a career criminal. If I have a firearm, I therefore have the upper hand. We're no longer in melee range. They have a less chance of getting to me and causing me physical harm because I have that option of range.
Yeah. So let's talk about the fear, right? The fear of people is that mass shootings occur because someone who went under the radar, for whatever reason, purchases or obtains a firearm and goes on a shooting spree, right?
Yeah.
So we've effectively countered, well, if someone was seriously ill, right? They are either, you know, a career criminal or whatever, they're stopped at least legally from obtaining a firearm.
Yes.
Which leaves the facts of the people who are first-time firearms, who may or may not, like you said before, they have a 3-day wait period because they might have something that happened in their lives. These are the people I think a lot of people are concerned about, is like, oh, you know, they never owned a firearm before, but some shit happened, and now they want to just kill everyone. Which a lot of these instances happen, like, you know, Sandy Hook was like one of them.
But even then,
What?
right? So a lot of these, it's not even someone went out and bought a firearm that day and then did a big shooting. It's they planned it for a long while. They obtained one or knew how to obtain one. Or they had, like in the case of the Las Vegas shooter, they had a stockpile effectively. They had no warning signs and they went out and did this thing.
So how do you stop something like that? And that's really what these people are trying to do. They say no guns will stop that Las Vegas shooter.
So yeah, here's the kind of double-edged sort of it, right? So part of my job as an engineer, we do a lot of things that are called root cause corrective action in the production builds that are, you look at what actually causes the issue you're experiencing, and then if the corrective action you're developing really addresses the issue at hand. So a lot of times what you find is like, oh, there's this problem, and oh, well, we're gonna do this to fix it. And you're like, okay, you're checking for the problem. You might solve 10% of it, but you're not addressing the entirety of the problem. And that's the biggest place where I see corrective actions fail in my career, is that you're, addressing symptoms of the problem, but not the problem itself.
Yeah.
The problem isn't firearms are for sale. The problem is these people want to go out and harm others. And I think it's an entire separate debate where just because you get rid of firearms doesn't mean you're going to stop people from wanting to harm others. And I think you see that with these stabbing sprees, or these people who, rent a van and drive over crowds, things like that. There's always going to be some way to harm other people. And you see that prevalent not only in the U.S., but in these other major developed countries.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, this is really a civilization problem.
Yeah.
An innate human issue with violence and a certain degree of
I don't even necessarily
aggression.
think it's like a human issue. I think it's like you could weed a lot of these people out. Again, better background checks. Obviously, we do them, but better state reporting of all these issues, because a lot of times it's, okay, well, this state didn't report to the federal services and they bought it the next state over. Or, these people knew this guy was a problem. They still lent him a firearm, and then he went out and did these shootings. Stuff like that.
Yeah, so I can only see that we were talking about this the other time. Mass surveillance. That might be the only way to, fully...
So I don't
these
even
guys.
think mass surveillance would necessarily stop it, because in the case of the Vegas shooter, where he had no warning symbols ahead of time, I don't think that surveilling
Yeah, but
him
if you
full-time-
surveilled the fucking hotel, I mean, I guess they did, and they saw boxes and boxes going in
a
over
big
time.
problem of mass surveillance, and I think they kind of, ask China. That line just got us banned there, but a big problem of it is you can't monitor 100% of feeds at all times. In the same way that, the U.S. has a lot of tools at their disposal to, monitor activities across the world or activities on our homeland. But you can't employ enough people to watch all of those things 100% of the time, so it becomes retroactive after something happens, and then you look at the previous breadcrumbs that led up to it.
Yeah, which is where AI is supposed to fill the gap.
Yeah, but that's
Supposedly. That's
So-
where they're trying to go with
so
it.
we just opened 6 dangerous cans of worms with that. So we said keep firearms, but make everything a surveillance state with AI controls. And that's how we figure out mass shootings. Also, knives are fine.
Well, I mean, I'm just being the devil's advocate today.
That's fair,
so.
yeah. Just today, really? Can add that asterisk.
I was going to say when you're where, I'll come back to it later.
Where you should take a Viagra for your upset stomach.
No, I think it was along the lines of saying some positives for the negatives or something like that.
The double-edged sword?
The double-edged sword, yeah.
Yeah. Which part about it?
I don't know. I can't remember. Something along the lines of it benefits in some ways and doesn't benefit in others. And I was going to say, yeah, my penis enlargement, it benefits in some ways, but overall it still just didn't. Yeah, the 90% and 10%. It solved 10% of my issue. It's slightly bigger, but 90% of the issue is it's already fucking small. So
That's your selling point to when you're like, yo, it's bigger than it was before. It's like, wow, how small was it before?
exactly. So it's all relative, right? That's really
man.
the solution to solve the solutions is that it's all relative.
All right, so, okay, solving solutions. So like I said, the biggest issue I see is root cause, corrective action. A lot of times the corrective action doesn't actually address the root cause. It just addresses subsequent symptoms, right?
Yes. Which is a lot of things in society.
Yes. So I think to really address the root cause of people wanting to hurt other people, if you look at most of them, it's people who they're over their entire lives are obsessed with these shootings and obsessed with serial killers, or who feel they have been wronged or probably have been wronged their entire lives, and have been bullied and have always been put down or have horrible circumstances or have very religious extremist views, again, thinking they've been wronged by society in some way in several of those cases.
Yeah.
So,
So what about having more of an acceptance of psychological, maybe not evaluation, but on regular, kind of like you go to the dentist. I've been thinking about this for a lot, right?
so
You
you're
get
saying
preventative maintenance,
large
right?
scale mental health
Yes.
as like a mandatory requirement.
Yes, like you go to the dentist and they do a teeth cleaning, which is usually just, we're kind of just checking up, seeing how it is, making sure everything's good. Do you clean your teeth most of the time by yourself? Yes. You're not going to just
Sometimes.
go to you're not just going to go to the dentist and be like, "All right, it's been 6 months, clean my
I
teeth."
haven't brushed my teeth since February.
Your teeth
Oh my
would have
God,
been,
dude.
rotten out, especially with our modern day societal foods with all the sugars
Ugh.
and starches. So it's preventative maintenance, right? We should be doing something along the same thing for the average person. I believe that having a preventative counseling would help out a lot.
I don't disagree. I think that's a good thing to do, and especially I think for people who are potential firearm owners.
I think
All right.
anyone in general
Real
could benefit
real quick
from it.
tangent, right? So what a lot of very left-leaning states do is they put in these things that are, to prevent the wrong people from getting firearms that are, those health checks, whatever, into place. But all they really do is they add an unfair burden financially to lower income people who want to purchase a firearm. So, big example, Connecticut. We both used to live and work there. Very strict gun laws, right? You can't buy ammunition at all without a hunter's permit. Hunter's permit's extra money, effectively driving up the cost of the ammunition that you would have to pay. You can't get a handgun or I think even a firearm, like a rifle length firearm, but definitely not a handgun without taking like a firearm safety course. Okay, so now you're spending $500 to $800 on a safety course in addition to paying the price of a firearm. If you're living check to check, which a substantial portion of Americans are, quite frankly, all of a sudden having this $500 to $800 expense on top of the cost of purchasing a firearm, and then having to go through the registration process and the cost with getting a hunting license just to buy additional ammunition, puts an unfair financial burden on it to the point that it just eliminates the ability of all lower income individuals to purchase firearms. So here's the thing. Now going back to what you were saying about getting like the mental health screenings and like the check-ins, right? I think, especially with what we were saying earlier, I think the education portion of it is important. Teaching people the dangers of it, the reality of how you should handle it, the implications involved with that. I think that's important. I think the screenings involved are important to make sure people are in the right mindset and they're not going to go off and have these extremist views or these really negative views on life, or they had these hard experiences that they're going to go take it out on somebody else using a firearm, right? Yeah. I think it's important to do both those things, but I think we still, at the end of the day, have a right as Americans to own a firearm.
Yes.
So I think rather than restricting everyone all the time and making it unfairly expensive for those people to go and purchase one, especially when, quite frankly, if you are in a lower income area, you're probably more likely to need it if the crime rate's higher. I think instead of putting the financial burden on those individuals, if we want as a society to agree that, yes, we want people to have these trainings before getting one, taxpayer-funded education for it, taxpayer-funded mental screenings for it, and therefore we can all say as a society, yep, Jeff got a handgun, but we know he made it through our standard courses, he made it through our standard health screenings, therefore he's qualified to get one. He is considered low risk for misusing it.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, that's all you can do. If someone still gets around the system, they cheated it.
Which means they were already breaking the law.
They were already breaking the law, and at the end of the day, you're never going to eliminate 100% of anything with whatever, filter you try to use.
Yeah.
Because every filter is faulty in some ways. But going back to the whole health screening thing, in general, it would be beneficial to change the stigma of psychological health as a, oh, you're crazy, you have something wrong with you, to a, all right, we live in a society that is very strange, especially now with COVID, and it should be acceptable to talk to someone, even if it's just to voice your problems, which a lot of people don't even have their friends to hang out with anymore, which was effectively before your kind of psychological help, whether or not they were good or not.
So
And now you've effectively eliminated it. Now you've upped the people who are now under psychological distress, and that could, overload the system. Not saying just shootings, probably less likely that, but more likely other abusive situations that are more likely to occur with relationships and or work
so I agree.
environments.
I agree in theory. But in order to reduce the stigma to that extent, to get people to be okay with it, because you got to remember, people have been brought up with it for 10, 20, 30, 40, 100 years, depending on their generation, right? Thinking that it wasn't okay or it makes them weak or whatever stigmas that are associated with it. You can't just off the bat change those people's lifetime perceptions of mental illnesses and the stigmas associated with it. And to have a cultural change that large, you have to have effectively 100% of the population starting at a certain age bracket where they're still open enough to those perceptions. Take all of them and going forward instill that, which means it still won't be completely.
Yeah, it won't be completely, but I think it could start with legislation in terms of giving the individuals a ability for a free assessment.
I would agree with that.
Something along those lines of maybe once a year you have a check-in. Hey, how the fuck is your life going on right now? And if everything's cool. That's it. Free assessment done. I'm cool.
Free assessment. Here's a handgun.
Yeah, like if you're like, oh no, like I seriously have this problem. A lot of times, people just want people to hear what the fuck's going on.
No, I agree with that.
And that could be right, because right now, like let's say you wanted to do that. One, you'd have to have insurance, right? And two, a lot of insurances don't even consider psychological evaluation,
or have very strict limitations.
Like, oh, it has to be diagnosed as a certain thing, and
Yeah.
and then you put the stigma onto that, whereas opposed to this is a free evaluation, and it's just to make sure that everything's going well, because we do have a certain sense of like healthcare, right? You have health insurance, but even if you don't have insurance,
but
let's say you don't even have health insurance, you're still technically supported by the state in a certain amount of way, right? Like
to a capacity.
If something happened, right? But if we spend a little bit more time talking about preventative maintenance, right? This is better. Oh, my sister's calling me. I'll answer her later. Preventative maintenance versus let's enact this at the time that it's happening.
Versus retroactive.
Retroactive, which is kind of like what you were talking about before. Like, we have this problem. Let's solve it at the last point, right? Someone shot a gun, and that's the last point. Whereas there could have been steps before, like, hey, something's going wrong in their lives. Hey, no one has been talking to them. Hey, this has been going on for a while. Let's look at this. Or even if it wasn't for a while, maybe if they knew they had that option, something really fucking bad happened. If it was free, and maybe that would help, because I feel like the majority of people are like, you know what, I want to fix this problem.
Yeah, and I agree.
And they
right?
go to fix the problem. They say, well, can't do that. Let me just shoot up the fucking place.
I don't think that's a complete A to B.
I think it's pretty close to that.
But I agree. You're right. Like, there is no option currently available as an alternative, whereas we probably need one. And I think legislation probably is that first step to put that in place as an option for these individuals. And I don't think it's straight up like, oh, there's no one to talk to. Guess I'm going to go shoot people. But I think it gradually ramps to that, to the point that, at least in their head, they view there is no other option.
Yeah.
And I think, like you said, if we had adequate legislation in place to provide these services, especially like on taxpayer dollar, I think as a whole, as a society, we could agree, all right, if that's something we put in place as a safety metric for everyone, I think everyone would reasonably be okay with buying into that.
Yeah.
I mean, my opinion, but like, I'm also not that much of a socialist, and I'm still okay with it. But like,
Yeah, I mean, we're not talking about like supporting the sessions for 20 years. We're talking about,
once or twice a year at
a-
first, and then like if they decide, hey, maybe you should go consult somebody else, maybe that goes under your insurance, and your insurance has to cover it. But like, that's legislation too.
yeah, I mean, your insurance could cover it, and if it didn't, they would kind of like, with whatever Medicare or something like that.
Or under like emergency situations where they're like, wow, this person really needs it, and it's kind of, again, like a Medicare type thing, like a temporary disability benefit almost,
Yeah.
where you get the short-term counseling, maybe it's 3 to 6 months, and then they say, okay, that's should be adequate. But
Yeah.
it's something.
It's something to start, at least a discussion to be had. But
At least as long as it's not run by AI. Fuck you. That's why.
Can you imagine that? So, how are you feeling today?
How are you feeling? Data point 7 tells me you are lying. Like, oh, well, that church is getting shot.
Yeah, but then again, people are gonna judge us because they're like, "Well, you're from New Hampshire and you don't know about all this stuff because you don't live in a state that, blah 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 has a
Yeah,
high
we're 45 minutes in
population."
Boston. They can piss off. Like, we're closer to Boston than most New Yorkers are to New York City.
Yeah,
Like-
exactly. And the whole stereotype from like, for example, like when I talk to the Canadians, they're like, "Oh, you fucking Americans shooting up shit." So
Yeah, everyone in Europe, too, thinks we're cowboys.
yeah, so that's like the stereotype when we talk about guns is like, oh, fucking cowboys, they need their guns. It's crazy that they have so many guns.
Yeah, I mash up in the morning and I snort them like cocaine.
But at the same time, like you said, it's part of the culture. To change that culture, all right, that's debatable, right? I mean, culture is always changing, but to a certain extent.
So,
And
building on top of that, it's not only culture, but like it's a national defense issue too, right?
yeah, so people forget how big the U.S. is and how many people we have here.
But not only that, there was like one of the Japanese generals, I want to say it was World War II, who was like, yeah, you couldn't ever invade the American mainland because there'd be a gun behind every blade of grass. And I think like whether or not we acknowledge it from a national security standpoint, that is a huge deterrent for any potential adversaries from coming here and like coming after our own soil. Like obviously our military might in general, like, we got a lot of stuff that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean,
But
we
then
have
also-
so much defense spending that
We
you
have so much
could
defense
say-
spending, but on top of that, let's say you get by that and like Russia lands a ship on the East Coast and they're like, yo, we're taking over Boston. The number of people we have, like if they landed in Georgia and we're like, yo, we're invading, wouldn't happen. Virginia or like the Carolinas wouldn't happen. Like Mass has a little more strict firearms rules, so like maybe it wouldn't be as big of a deal there.
They go up to New Hampshire, they'd be like, "Hey guys, can you help us out?" And you'd be like, "Nah, bro.
Be like, sorry, you can't cross state lines per your rules.
Yo, COVID though, you need to wear a mask."
Yeah, New Hampshire, Vermont, and Maine would just be chilling with our sanctuaries of firearms. Be like, this is a new sanctuary city, bitch.
So that's another thing that I was watching some videos where they're talking about, well, right now there's issues with crop production, right?
Yeah.
They weren't able to plant, harvest, or maintain and harvest a lot of these crops because of COVID and the necessary amount of workers to work on these, right? This is an ongoing issue as like our harvesting season's coming to a close. We don't even know the devastating effects that this is going to cause. But
Other than that oddly pessimistic note.
on the oddly pessimistic note, what I'm going with this is let's say shit hits the fan, right? Our economy collapses. What then becomes the important things to an individual, right? Well, right now,
Protection.
money is important, right? Why? Because we say it is important. It doesn't actually have any value.
But it allows us to live because that's how we get
Yes,
our...
we exchange value
Yeah.
through it. But the economy collapses. All of a sudden, your dollar bills, like there's many cases in history, Roman civilization, Germany, etc. The money goes to inherently zero.
etc. The only examples you could think of, but continue.
Venezuela. Continue. I mean, we can continue.
No, we're good. We're good. I was just busting your balls, but hey.
And so, what, like you said, protection. Firearms have an inherent value, whether you accept it or not. And
Yeah, because when the money's gone, right? Because the money is how we get utility out of things, is because we exchange it because we believe it has value in our stupid little brains, right?
yes,
But you're right. When that value, that inherent value, goes away because we go off the gold standard, that's the utility value is what becomes important. So food has utility value because you eat
Yes,
it.
exactly.
Transportation, so a vehicle has utility value, and a firearm is
Protection.
it is defense. It is protection. Therefore, it increases your expected lifespan. That is utility value.
yes, and of course, community, right?
Yeah,
Being
protection
on the
in
good
numbers,
side.
but it's going back to protection.
Yeah. So who's gonna be the top dog at the end of the day when shit hits the fan? People who have
Who have the
protection,
resources and the utility
resources,
available
yeah.
to them,
They have food, water, shelter. These are the main things.
and
that
have
we
the
need.
ability to defend those resources.
Yes, and the thing is, we live in a first world society where we go, well, we don't need all these things because like we take it for granted.
But here's
But
the
we
thing.
can see as things have been, slowly changing, where people are like, oh, well, what happens when, we can no longer trade because, like, the whole COVID situation, shit hit the fan. And what are you going to do then? Right? Like,
Yeah, and furthermore, right, like you said, oh, well, we don't need it, right?
yeah.
America's not built on need to begin with. Like, this is, okay, total tangent here. But, right, like, you don't need a new Google Pixel phone or a new iPhone every year. But
No.
we release one. Quite frankly, the last one's camera's just fine and they still get signal.
Yeah, I mean, most of stuff that Americans buy, we don't really need.
You don't need a Suburban to get your one kid to soccer practice. But you bought one. You might have bought 3.
Yes, so that is a true statement that Americans do buy in excess.
Yes.
And so on that, right, when shit hits the fan and you can no longer have excess, right, where a lot of this whole movement on, consolidation and a minimalistic lifestyle, right?
I think at its base, that is the most minimal yet most effective form of defense in ensuring your survival is still a firearm. And I think that's what it boils down to.
Yeah, so that really is like, what's the minimal amount that you can do, right? Because once you have a gun, right, what do you need to have? Bullets. Can you manufacture bullets, or do we have enough bullets in a time where...
You can manufacture your own
Yeah.
if you need to.
And gunpowder is relatively easy to make.
I can't say I've tried recently.
I mean, they've had it for generations and generations. And, right, what are the utility purposes? Like, let's say shit hits the fan. Hunting, right?
Hunting, survival,
Survival in terms of when shit hits the fan,
gets food.
people are going to be fighting over food.
So defense,
Defense,
which is
and-
survival.
And 3 is laying a certain sense of law and or order around communities. Otherwise, there's going to be fucking mayhem.
which leads to survival.
Defunding the police.
Good. Yeah,
Oh,
that's
another
that's
tangent.
exactly. I was like, huh? Almost had the graph completed, man.
Oh man, dude, I was transitioning into another
Oh,
current,
man, so-
current topic.
Oh my god, yeah, no, that's
That's a whole nother can of worms.
that's
we'll
a
probably-
can. We'll tackle that one next time. But yeah, so going back to where we started today, right? I think whether or not people on the individual level agree with it, I think firearms are a necessary part of our culture for all these reasons we discussed, and we can't just eradicate them prima facie. And I think whether or not people want to admit it, the NRA is a very important establishment in maintaining that right, which is, quite frankly, a right for American citizens. So I think at the end of the day, should these people be prosecuted for misusing not for profit or charitable funds?
Yes,
100%
absolutely.
is going after firearms as a whole the right answer, and the organization that ensures that right, is that the right answer? I don't think so. I do think there is way too much political basis behind that, and I think that's where we should end the episode.
Yes, agreed.
All right. Signing off for now, guys. Thank you guys for watching.
Peace.